Beijing outplayed the Kremlin. China chose Ukraine. Moscow is in shock. Sensation from Munich. Andriy Sybiga dropped a diplomatic bombshell. The Celestial Empire supports Ukraine's territorial integrity. Moscow is furious. Sensational statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Beijing said no to weapons for Russia. Allies are fleeing. Central Asia is turning away from the Kremlin. Russia is falling apart at the seams. The great geopolitical game is reaching a new level. All the details I'll tell you in just a moment. Greetings, this is Ukraine Today and I am Andriy Silakov bringing you the latest events. Checkmate. To the Kremlin, Beijing suddenly changes its tone. An explosive meeting in Munich. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga held talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. And here comes the sensation. The main buyer of Russian oil declares support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and is preparing energy assistance for Kyiv.
We believe that China can play an important role in bringing a just peace to Ukraine. We appreciate that China supports Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Yes, the very same China that the Kremlin was counting on so much is now publicly expressing its commitment to the principles of the UN Charter and signaling its role in achieving a just peace. Sybiga states directly that Beijing could become a key player in implementing the peace formula. The Ukrainian side reminded the Chinese about Russian strikes on the energy sector and that Chinese companies were also affected. The hint is clear. Russian missiles are hitting not only Ukraine but also Beijing's interests.
I am grateful for Beijing's decision to provide Ukraine with an additional package of humanitarian energy aid. And
yet another blow to Kremlin myths. According to Ukrainian intelligence, China is not supplying lethal weapons to Russia. Yes, there are certain dual-use goods, and Kyiv openly acknowledges this, but there is no evidence of arms deliveries.
According to our intelligence, China is not supplying weapons to the Russian Federation. We have no such evidence. Perhaps some instances have been identified. Some issues, but we have no evidence that China is supplying lethal weapons to Russia.
And now some figures that might make Moscow cough nervously. China is Ukraine's #1 trading partner and trade turnover has reached $21 billion. Kyiv is not just maintaining contact, it is strengthening its economic track.
It should not be forgotten that, as of today, China is Ukraine's #1 trading partner. And last year, our trade turnover reached $21 billion. We are interested in further developing this track of mutually beneficial cooperation. And
against this backdrop comes a loud statement from Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. Russia had a choice to become a partner of the West or a vassal of China. Moscow chose the latter, such is the irony of fate. While the Kremlin is losing resources and burning through its wealth, China is calmly strengthening its position. The great game continues.
Russia, which has been unable to conquer Donbas in 4 years, is not capable of conquering Europe. And
another sensational piece of news from China. Beijing is urgently distancing itself from any involvement in the creation of Oreshnik. China publicly denies any connection to the production of the Russian Wunderwaffe. At the same time, it makes a sharp statement. There is no support for Russian aggression against Ukraine, and there never has been. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasizes that China does not profit from Russia's war against Ukraine.
China's position on the Ukrainian crisis is consistent and clear. We are not adding fuel to the fire, and we are not using this conflict for our own gain.
The empire is crumbling, allies are fleeing, and the war against Ukraine is rapidly destroying Putin's influence. The former Soviet republics are turning away from Moscow en masse and gravitating toward China, the EU, and Turkey. Bloomberg writes about this directly.
Countries are trying to minimize risks and are looking for ways to distance themselves from Russia as much as possible.
The Kremlin is losing Central Asia, quickly and irreversibly. Over the past 2 years, China's trade with the 5 Central Asian republics has grown by a third.
Russia can no longer project power abroad when all its resources are being consumed by the war in Ukraine. Their capabilities are stretched to the limit, and the main priority is the war.
Moreover, China is making super profits from Russia, but has not supplied a single unit of weaponry. This was stated by the head of the president's office, Kyrylo Budanov.
China realized how to take advantage of this, and Russia found a reliable partner for the supply of electronics, then machinery, and then various materials used to produce weapon components.
In addition, Beijing increased its influence over Moscow by taking advantage of the tightening Western sanctions.
The more the sanctions worked from the outside, the more Russia fell into China's hands, which is now completely obvious to everyone.
He added that China is now absorbing the aggressor country and it's painful for Russians to admit this. Moreover, despite the existing exchange of military technologies between the two countries, according to Budanov, China has still not supplied Russia with a single unit of weaponry. It seems that China is trusting Russia less and less. Russia is on the verge of collapse, and in China, they're already counting the territories. The aggressor country may fall apart, and in Beijing, they see this as a window of opportunity. A Chinese media platform writes about this directly. What is this? Analysis, a warning, or a real plan for the future? Details in our report.
China is Russia's main partner, supporting its economy and military machine. At least that's how propaganda presents it.
I personally consider President Xi Jinping to be an incredibly reliable friend and a very stable partner for our nation. He is my truly reliable friend, a steadfast and stable partner, and the most loyal ally of the Russian Federation. And this deep personal connection is the main foundation for the continued strategic development of our Russian-Chinese relations.
But is that really the case? After all, trade turnover with China is constantly decreasing. Chinese banks are stopping transactions with Russia due to sanctions. And at the same time, China denies selling weapons or components to Russia.
China's position on the Ukrainian crisis is consistent and clear. We do not add fuel to the fire and do not use this conflict for personal gain.
Pairs, threes, tens of millions of Chinese soldiers. That would be just what we need right now. And
why do you think so?
why not?
Why? Do you really think soldiers should only...
Oh, I look at the Belgorod region and think, how much we're missing. The Chinese army, the people for us.
Just 3 years ago, propagandists were happy that China would replace the Western market. But it turned out that it replaced the Russian one as well. The Russian authorities are trying to patch a giant hole in the budget with a government loan in Chinese yuan.
We just bought a wonderful, completely Chinese car. Amazing. Many, many times cheaper than the cars we used to buy before. I bought myself 3 pairs, Gucci shoes. 2,000 rubles each. Wonderful. Probably made somewhere in China as well. Though I hope here too. Fake, of course. Now I buy them on principle. Only fakes.
And just look at what, for example, the fighters drive. What Russian-made cars, right? You have to be a real patriot to drive a Patriot because it costs a fortune and breaks down all the time. And the spare parts are insane. That's why the guys drive Chinese cars. And now they need motorcycles. Russian ones? No. Somehow it turns out that way, right? There are a few Russian ones.
There aren't any Russian ones at all. So,
what are we even talking about?
no, Russian motorcycles don't exist.
What's it?
Who knows?
Even the head of the foreign ministry, Lavrov, had a Freudian slip. He basically called Putin Xi Jinping's donkey.
As they say in the East, a guest is the host's donkey. So the whole program, of course, depends on those gracious proposals made by the Chinese president and his team, offered to our wise
leader. And yesterday, my friend and representative of the PRC treated me to Peking duck. Honestly, I'll tell you, there were 2 pieces there, and I thought I'd only eat 1. You know what I mean, right? That's it. But I couldn't resist and ate the second one. You see, it was just too delicious.
China has officially approved new geographic maps on which a large part of Russian territory is included. Ussuri Island is recognized as Chinese territory. And they're also openly discussing scenarios for annexing Russia's Far East, rich in gold, diamonds, and oil, which the Chinese have already largely settled anyway.
The Chinese dragon is unlikely to stay within its borders simply because, by the way, it has historical grounds for doing so, for a significant part of our Far East, and that's a fact.
Of course, at first there was enthusiasm, but it gradually faded, and eventually we all realized that Asina had become a Chinese colony. Well, it's simply a slave-owning enterprise. A slave-owning enterprise or a prison.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Call it what you will, where they put overseers in charge so that they could keep watch over the workers, because there was still resentment after all. And the workers in Asina even staged a protest called Asina is not China. And they also regularly threaten, saying you won't be able to get a job anywhere in this city. Here's your black mark. So just sit quietly and keep your mouth shut for your 15 to 30,000.
Russian television is already showing videos about how to find a Chinese husband and in Russian schools and government institutions, Chinese language is being actively studied.
It is divided into two camps. Those who want to study it and those who are skeptical and say, why do we need Chinese? We're not planning to go anywhere. I answer them very simply, actually. I say, I'm not teaching you Chinese here, but using the Chinese language to make you think with your head, and that skill will always come in handy.
It reached the point of complete absurdity when Xi Jinping declared that Russia would not have won World War II without China, and Putin silently agreed.
China and Russia, being the main theaters of military operations in World War II, made a decisive contribution to the victory over fascism. And in doing so, they laid the cornerstone of the post-war world order.
So it turns out China isn't helping at all.
The US is allocating $13 billion to Armenia to reduce its dependence on Russia. Azerbaijan has signed a strategic partnership agreement with the United States. Kazakhstan is blocking Russians from laundering money and circumventing sanctions. In addition, Russia is losing one of its main weapons buyers and allies in Asia, Vietnam. About how Russia's former allies are moving further and further away from the Kremlin, more on this in the following segment.
The United States is strengthening its strategic partnership with Azerbaijan and Armenia, while Russia appears to be losing the battle for influence in the Caucasus region.
The agreement with Armenia and the visit of the Hungarian leader to neighboring Azerbaijan the next day highlighted the intensifying geopolitical struggle for influence in the Caucasus region, a vital trade and energy corridor connecting China with Europe through Central Asia, which for decades has been under Moscow's close watch.
As is known, Azerbaijan and the United States signed a strategic partnership charter, while Armenia signed an agreement with the US on cooperation in the nuclear field.
Turkey, which has a defense pact with Azerbaijan, is taking steps to open its border with Armenia, which has been closed since 1993, and to establish diplomatic relations for the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The European Union is also strengthening its ties with Armenia, which has announced plans to seek EU membership in the future, even though it is currently part of a customs bloc led by Russia.
Well, what can I say? Even all the former Soviet republics, we lived as one family of nations.
Russia is also relentlessly losing its influence in Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan is blocking Russians from laundering money and circumventing sanctions. CPD.
In fact, the president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, stated that about $14 billion were laundered from a neighboring country through one of Kazakhstan's banks. And although Tokayev did not directly name Russia, the Kremlin clearly understood which country the head of Kazakhstan was referring to. Russia is also losing one of its main buyers of weapons and an ally in Asia.
Vietnam is one of the largest and traditional buyers of Russian weapons in Asia. But now it is increasingly turning to Western manufacturers. An important signal of this shift was the negotiations with France on the supply of Rafale fighter jets.
There is growing disappointment with the actions of Russia and China, but support for the Kremlin continues there, in particular because Russia's weakening due to the war is very beneficial for Beijing.
Therefore, when we consider the claim that China, notwithstanding all of those official strategic documents, is truly a committed ally, well, the reality is that most likely the answer is no, because China is actually interested in the weakening of the Russian Federation. The longer the Russian Federation wages war, the more it spends. The more dependent it becomes on China, on its products, on Chinese technology, both in the civilian and military sectors. Russia's becoming dependent on Chinese loans, Russia's becoming dependent on China's purchase of Russian oil, and this is beneficial for China.
Russia's former allies, as they say, are slowly but surely distancing themselves from the Kremlin. And while today this distancing may not yet be very noticeable in the Kremlin, in the near future Russia could find itself alone with its imperial ambitions.
$38 billion is one of the largest aid packages to Ukraine during the entire period of the full-scale war. Combined with the reforms being carried out by Ukraine's military leadership, this is already a serious bid to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Ukrainians.
One of the largest military aid packages of the entire war. The latest Ramstein meeting ended with a major victory for Ukraine and a personal triumph for Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. So, as a result of the meeting, the partners confirmed the allocation of $38 billion in military aid to Ukraine. The funds will go towards drones, air defense systems, and Patriot missiles.
Importantly, the Ramstein format has been preserved despite changes in the approach of the United States, where the Donald Trump administration has focused on selling weapons. The Ramstein format remains one of the most essential strategic mechanisms available today. It allows for comprehensive medium-term planning of the procurement and delivery of vital military weapons, typically planned several months in advance to ensure stability.
For example, Minister Fedorov stated that more than $6 billion have already been allocated in specific aid packages, including over $2.5 billion for Ukrainian drones, more than $500 million for the Pural program, $2 billion for air defense, as well as funds for artillery ammunition and the preparation of naval operations, and other areas. It is also worth noting separately that Ukraine has reached agreements with a number of European partners for the urgent delivery of missiles for the systems, Patriot from their stockpiles. For security reasons, the quantity is, of course, not disclosed.
In the future, Ukraine needs reliable security guarantees. I am absolutely confident that the flow of vital American weaponry to Ukraine will continue. As I have already mentioned, about 90% of Ukraine's critically important air defense needs are met by Patriot missile systems. And I am absolutely certain that this flow will continue.
At the forefront of those ready to ensure this flow, as is tradition, are London and Berlin. For example, the United Kingdom is allocating £500 million for air defense and another £150 million for the Pural initiative. Overall, £3 billion have been allocated for military aid to Ukraine in 2026. This time, Germany has focused on drones. At least $1 billion will be allocated for the purchase of drones. They are also investing in air defense and in the program for training and equipping the newly created drone assault units of the Ukrainian armed forces. In total, that's 11.5 billion euros.
NATO itself is interested in developing such protocols in order to actively interact with Ukraine, actively help Ukraine, and implement that very initiative. Pearl, on the purchase of American weapons using European money, and at the same time actively participate in truly new structures of the joint military-industrial complex with Europe.
Norway also pleasantly surprised. For 2026, $7 billion have been allocated for Ukraine. This includes drones, air defense, artillery, as well as the purchase of weapons from the US.
This country is very wealthy and it is providing an exceptionally high level of active and consistent support to Ukraine, and its significant and ongoing financial contributions are presently reaching a quite substantial and impactful scale, allowing them to effectively bridge the gap and cover precisely what the United States is not currently supplying.
Also at the recent Ramstein meeting, Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Canada, Iceland, Australia, Portugal, Turkey, Slovenia, as well as the Baltic countries joined the initiative. Mainly, all those mentioned focused on purchasing
the vast and highly sophisticated array of advanced American weapon systems, which are meticulously engineered and manufactured within the United States, represents a pinnacle of modern military technology and strategic defense capabilities utilized by various armed forces across the entire globe today. In the near future, the attempt to stop both economic and military aid to Ukraine has failed, and the entire Kremlin strategy was based on this, dragging out time.
At the same time, it's worth noting that right after Ramstein, another meeting of leaders on military issues is taking place right now, at the Munich conference. And the fact that the US came there for the first time with an expanded delegation clearly indicates that the states have no intention of distancing themselves from the defense of Europe.
And what do you think about these events? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay up to date with the main news and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.